Hi, I'm Beverly Ford. I am a member of the SPJ New England. And tonight we have as our guest speaker, Stephanie Schorow. She is a journalist, writing instructor, and the author of 8 books on Boston history, including the soon-to-be published The Great Boston Fire, The Inferno that nearly incinerated. Was it italics? I couldn't read it. Incinerated the city. Inside the Combat Zone, Drinking Boston, the Coconut Grove Fire, East of Boston, Notes from the Harbor Islands, and The Crime of the Century, How the Brinks Robbery Stole Millions. Millions and the Hearts of Boston. She currently coordinates a citizen journalism program for Malden Urban Media Arts, teaches professional writing and editing at LaSalle University in Newton, Mass, and serves as communication writer for Ariadne. Is that
Ariadne, known
Ariadne Labs in Boston. She has worked as an editor and reporter for the Boston Herald, the Associated Press, and newspapers in Connecticut, Idaho, and Utah. Her novel, Cat Dreaming, will be published later in 2022. Stephanie, do you want to tell us a little bit about how you got into this work?
Yeah, this book, and I'll start showing slides in a minute, but this is a book, it's a kind of continuation of my interest in fire history in Boston. And I'm going to be first to say that I wouldn't know how to fight a fire to save my life. I mean, I have to make it very clear. I'm not writing this from the perspective of how to fight fires, but I'm very interested in the history of fires and the way they.
Uh-oh. What happened? We lost her.
Well, I'm back. I don't know what that was I don't know what that was all about, but somebody didn't like what I was saying. So, okay, I'm back. Was that just me that went out?
Yeah.
Just now? Oh, that's weird. Okay. All right, gremlins. All right, so this is just a continuation of my interest in Boston history and Boston fires. I'll go ahead and I will start sharing my slides. The host disabled, we got to do that again. So who's the host right now? Adam, you're back being the host. You'll have to make me a co-host again for some reason. When it kicked me out.
It's not here.
What?
It doesn't look like Adam's here.
Okay. That's going to be interesting.
Technical difficulties.
Okay, technical difficulties. Okay, I will tell you what. So he's not here at all?
I don't see him.
Okay.
No, I'll text him now.
Okay, all right, so I'll kind of talk off extemporaneously, but I'd love to show some images from what I'm doing, because when you want to cover disaster like this, and let me speak to everybody here, because I think everyone here is a writer or wants to write or is interested in writing a book. You have to think about how you're going to do it. I mean, you can write just the story of a big fire. Basically, this new book is just a story of a big, humongous fire. And you'd say, okay, it's a big fire, so what else? So yes, it was the biggest fire in Boston in terms of actual acreage. And yes, it came the year after the Chicago fire and was more costly per acre than the Chicago fire. But the Great Boston Fire had a surprisingly small loss of life. So it has a kind of peculiar history. It was huge, but it didn't result in a lot of deaths. So when we get up, I'll be able to show you some pictures of the devastation. Oh, I'm the host now. Okay, there we go. All right, this is so much fun to do this kind of thing. Okay, and we are recording, so that didn't stop. So share screen. Here we go. Share. And let me just move this around a little bit. Hold on, guys. Okay, can everyone see the screen now? Thumbs up?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So we went through that, and I was just going to talk about books. This fire, there were a lot of fires in Boston history. But the thing about the Great Boston Fire is at the time, there were a lot of fires. Fires were just decimating the country. 19th century fires were huge, and that's an important point, which I'm going to get to later. So I had to put this in context. Everybody knows the 1871 fire of Chicago. It has a catchy lyric, late last night. We can all sing this. We all were singing at camp. Boston doesn't have a song. So I had to think about, okay, how am I going to approach this fire? What am I going to say about it? Here's a picture of the fire. And as you can see, it was pretty amazing. And I had to answer the question, why are we still interested in this fire? What does it mean for us? Let me just show you where it was, just so as we get our heads around it. This is a picture of the spread of the fire back in 1872. And you can kind of see it started down here and really just spread across the city. This is Boston today. The geography has changed, but just so you know where it was, I'm just placing it on a Google map that I found. And basically, you can see today it would spread all over this downtown area. Now, Boston had a great fire department at the time. And so you would think we were protected, but we were not. And instead, we had this huge blaze. And here's another view of it, which just shows you how devastating it was. Now, in going to tell this story, one thing I dwelt on in my book, and I encourage anybody who's writing a book to think about that, is a lot of illustrations that tell a story. The trouble with this fire, there are no photos of the actual fire, none, because photography wasn't advanced enough. However, we have a lot of illustrations, and through the power of eBay, great tool, books, the internet, I was able to gather a lot of pictures of this fire. And there we are. Here we are, Devonshire Street. You can see how big this fire was. Basically, the fire began at a building at Kingston and Summer Street. And for reasons that are still a little obscure, it began to spread rapidly. The fire department responded fairly quickly with one example, but they just could not control it. The fire just started to spread from building to building and from roof to roof, because at the time, a lot of these buildings in the downtown area were using something called the mansard roof, which is a wooden roof. So the fire jumped, you can kind of see it up here, it jumps from roof to roof, and it just quickly got out of control. The other thing was, the city was growing way too fast, and there was not enough water in the water mains. The water mains were still small when this area was a residential area, and they just couldn't get enough water on the fire. And you can kind of see that here in the picture. If you can see, notice how the streams only go up so high. Best way to fight a fire is to go from the top down, and the streams were entirely inadequate. So the fire just spread. Plus, you can see people throng the streets trying to rescue things, or just to gawk, or to loot, try to get someone's material. Another lithograph I found of the fire. I mentioned this already, so we're going to draw on. So I'm just going to summarize this fire, because I don't want to talk necessarily about the fire as much as the process of writing about the fire. In the end, this fire, before took 3 days to get it under control. It destroyed about 776 buildings, massive damage, killed 11 firefighters and 1 former firefighter. So there was some death there. The damage would be probably more like $1 billion today. I say 500 million, but it was really probably more. But what we don't know, again, was the amount of people who were killed. We think it was about 30 people or less, but there was not an accurate count on it. So in writing this book, I couldn't dwell on the tragedy of the people killed, because we really didn't know who they were. And we didn't even know how many of them were. We did know there were a lot of results from this fire, that we got new zoning rules and a new code to try to build the city safer. And though ironically enough, we did have some major fires in this same area several years after the major fire. So there was some ironies in that. But the thing that struck me when I first started to write about this was to conceive of the massive damage here. It was like seeing Hiroshima. It was like seeing Dresden. It was massive. And this had a psychological impact on the city. As I said, not a lot of deaths, but the psychological impact of seeing the city, which was a very small this time, devastated, certainly had an impact. There was a lot of attention to the bravery of the firefighters who fought this fire. This is from a cover of Harper's Illustrated, very kind of a fancified, romanticized view of the fire, but I think it kind of catches the drama of this event. And this is one of the many panoramic views of the fire. I think this is a drawing, but was made from a photograph. Because at the time, there were many illustrations of the fire in the news of the day, the newspapers of the day, but they were rendered into illustrations because there was not the technology to actually print photos in newspapers. So what they would do was they take a photo, they basically redraw it and print it in the paper. There are some amazingly dramatic photos of the aftermath of the fire. Some of the best photographers in the city rushed to get these fires. These are actually from the Flickr account on the Boston Public Library. And they are amazing landscape photos that really captured not just the journalistic, but sort of the artistic sense of this destruction of the city. And in terms of researching, I use these photos. I use, of course, newspapers at the time. This is an entire headline, I believe, from the Boston Herald. And this is the way they set up headlines in the States, these huge stacks. You could read the whole story, not even in the lead, right in the headline. But in terms of when I started to write this fire, I really had to do a couple things. One, I had to have characters. I had to tell the story through people. And one of the people I chose to tell the story through is a guy named John Dameron, and he was the chief of the Boston Fire Department. They called him chief engineers. And he was an amazing person in terms of his ability to fight fires. He was a builder. He was a very structured, honorable man. But here's the thing. He warned about this. He warned that the city could go up. He went to the city council. He went to anybody who would listen to him to say, we have a problem in the downtown area of Boston. The water mains are too small. There are these mansard roofs. We have a problem here. And he talked and talked, and he was not listened to. Now, you might assume that this emerged after the fire, that he said, well, I warned you guys. But I could go back into, through the internet, go back to his actual reports and go back to his actual words and find out, yes, he did indeed warn about this. And I drew the connection to, and I had to, with what's happening today, or what happened with COVID. Because there was warnings. There were warnings that this could spread. There were talks about we were facing a massive pandemic. I finished this book just as the COVID thing was really peaking. And it struck me as that so many times in history, there are people who warn about these events. They don't come out of the blue. They are warned and they're not listened to. So he became one of the characters in my retelling of the story. Another person I picked out and used his story throughout my book is a reporter, because of course I'm drawn to that. And it was based on this article that I found in an archive. You can't get this online, by the way, because the Herald is not yet online. You can find it in microtext if you know where to look, but it's not yet to the quality of a searchable document, at least not that I found. So this was something that was clipped it was kept at the Boston Athenaeum, and it was this reporter's memories of the fire. And it's written many years later by this reporter who actually covered it as a young cub reporter. And he has this amazing story about going to a press function. He was going to a press dinner that night with all the journalists of the city. We're all gathering, eating and drinking, when someone came into the meeting and said, "Gentlemen, are you aware that the city is on fire?" And so they all go, "Oh," and they all run out, and he helped to cover this fire. And I was able to trace the fire, tell the story through his eyes, partly through this really complete account that he wrote later. It's the only account I've been able to find by him. He's written other books, but it's the only account he wrote of the fire. And then I started looking into Sylvester Baxter and found out he was actually quite an interesting character who became an author, a city planner. He helped to establish the Middlesex Fells, where I hike a lot. So when you start looking at a character in a book, sometimes you find that it goes beyond the pages of the actual event that you are talking about. So he had an effect on Boston history. You haven't heard of him, but he has, that goes beyond this fire. Witnesses, when we have a big event or murder or something, witnesses are very important. And so one of my jobs was to find witnesses to this, and there were some accounts, but I also found that some of the best literary lights of Boston witnessed this fire. Louisa May Alcott. I just stumbled across this on Google, and then I went and found the notes that she wrote, which she wrote about a letter to her sister. I believe it was Meg. I have to remember that. In Little Women. I don't know if you guys know your Little Women, but that was her thing. And so she had some really interesting comments about it. William Lloyd Garrison, the famous abolitionist, also went toward the fire, and I found he was a bit of a spark. He was a bit of a fire junkie. He liked collecting pictures of fires. He liked going to fires. You wouldn't imagine that this very serious looking man who played such a great role in the anti-slavery movement was also a bit of a spark, but I was able to include that. One thing I had to put my head when we were talking about, when I wrote about this book, in the technology and the infrastructure of the 19th century. And one was, of course, everything was horse-drawn, and horses drew fire engines. They pulled trolleys. Except for railroads, they're the main form of transportation in the country. And I found out, I'd heard about this, but I really went into it, that the year of the fire, there was a huge, what they would call epizootic. In other words, a pandemic among horses, an equine flu that felled horses throughout the country. Started in Canada and went across the country all the way to California, up to Canada, and a little bit in Mexico. Did not go to Europe, but it wiped out almost every horse in the country at one time or another. This is an illustration of it, again, from Harper's. You show the poor horse. Here's another way to look at it. And this was, again, you have to put your mind back into it. This was like a power outage and total, not just a power outage, but every train, every car went dead. That's how devastating it was. Now, it only lasted a few days. The horses generally got better. They didn't all die. Some of them died, but not all of them. But this had an effect on the fire because it delayed the initial firefighters from getting to the fire. The horses were too sick to pull the fire engines. So the men had to pull it. So men literally pulled the fire engines to the fire, and that created some delays. Incidentally, in researching this aspect of the horse problem, I also found out, here's some examples of how men used for horsepower. Oops, went too far there. I also found out about some issues with the Humane Society, because one of the people who was very much involved with this effort to protect animals, including horses, was our Angel, the Angel for Angel Memorial, where the animal hospital, where the veterinary hospital is now. So I think these things got a little out of order, but that's okay. The other thing I wanted to talk about in my telling of the story is about, again, technology. Now, does anyone know what this is? Does anyone have a ViewMaster when they're little? And you look through the ViewMaster and you see that? Well, this is an example of 19th century technology. Let me see if I can get that in focus. Those are cards that are meant to be viewed into a device like this to give you a 3D impact on the fire. And you go, okay, that's very amusing. Well, photographers after the fire fell all over themselves to get to the scene to take pictures of the devastation. Why? Because they could monetize this, because they could turn it into all these different ViewMasters and market them around the country. And because at the time, the use of devices like this, you can see that it's a little bit out of focus, were something that people would sit around and put in pictures of scenery, they'd put in travel cards, things like that. But they also liked looking at disasters. They also liked looking at scenes of devastation. And you might think, oh, okay, that's kind of gross. Well, look at today's disaster movies. You can't go to a big movie today where something doesn't blow up and the world is being, I mean, how many times have you seen the earth destroyed in the movies? So this is, again, that tendency, oh, we like looking at disasters. So the fire produced these amazing images of these 3D. They would create a 3D effect if you looked at them through through these particular viewers, like the old ViewMasters. They must have produced thousands of them because these are all over eBay. I managed to grab a lot of them. They weren't very much money, so they're not particularly rare. So, which would imply that there were literally thousands made, and a lot of photographers made a lot of money off the fire that way. So that added a little extra to the telling of the tale. One of the reasons I think that we don't know too much about this fire is because Boston just really rebuilt very, very quickly. The fire lasted 3 days. It devastated the downtown, but many of the people were covered by insurance to a certain extent, and the rebuilding went on almost immediately. They started rebuilding it, and in a few years, the devastation was, you really don't see much of it. This building was just almost totally destroyed in the fire. This is the old post office, and a few years later, it was completed, and it was it stuck around, I think, until the 70s, in which it was taken down in the name of urban renewal and that kind of thing. Let me skip over that. Dameron, again, he was a character in my book, The Chief, and so I followed his life even after the fire and what he did. And what I found out was that he didn't just choose to fight fires, he tried to prevent fires from even happening. So he was the first chief of the city department of building. He was the first building inspector, if you will. And he was in that position for like almost 20 years, and then his son took over for him. He also started a group called the International Association of Fire Chiefs, which is still going on today. So he had this kind of outsized impact on firefighting and fire safety that I was able to trace for this book. So again, he was a great character that you could filter through this big story of a big fire. The other thing that I draw attention to is that we now have a similar phenomena of a fire menace that's going on, and that is the wildland fire. The wildland fire is taking the place of the 19th century urban fire. Urban fires in the 19th century just devastated cities. Now what we have are people built into the wildland area, and you, through climate change or other things, you have more fires that are devastating to that area between the wilderness and the city, and those are being devastated. And this is just a slide of some of those, some of these areas. So those are just a few things about how I had the story, but tried to create it as something that had some fictional or even novelistic elements to it, to try to make it more than just a story, of a big disaster, but to enhance our knowledge of Boston, not only about fire and firefighting, but of animal treatment, through zoning and other things, and even through technology and entertainment that people were using at the time. So I'm going to end here. We'll open up to any questions. And I want to also, like, we got a little disrupted at the beginning, but I want to say thanks so much to Adam and to SPJ New England for inviting me here to speak about this. I'm probably going to be speaking about this fire over and over again as we get into, and I don't even have the books yet, so we're just getting ready to launch it. And so I will be lecturing at it a lot of places. So it's just wonderful to be here with fellow journalists and hear your comments. And if you have any comments for me and a better way I can present this book, I really would appreciate that. So let me pause now and throw it open, see if there's any questions. Bev has a few, and then she can take some of your questions maybe in the chat. So
can you tell us how long it took you to research this book?
Sure. I spent about 2 years on this, maybe a little bit less. I started the book, and originally I had an original deadline, and I filed like the introduction by March 1st, 2020. And then you know what happened. Things just shut down. So I got an extension on the book. And then fortunately, I'd done a fair amount of research in person at libraries before everything got shut down. And so I was able to continue through the internet. So it took about 2 years to gather the material and to write it up. And the way I work is I do a lot of research first, and then I get started with writing, and then I go back and do more research, because as I'm writing, I'm finding holes in the process. So it was really a two-year project.
Wow, that's a long time. Is that kind of average 2 years for all the books you've written? Is that how long it takes?
It was a little bit more that sometimes I get a year, sometimes I get 2 weeks. But it's pretty quick. I work pretty quickly. I think most people don't work at that kind of pace, but I tend to really barrel into it. So believe me, these books, you could go on and on, you could research them forever. But what I'm doing is I'm writing a book that's for less an academic audience and more of a popular audience. So it's not that it's not rigorous. I have endnotes to it. I source all my material, but I don't have to go through a review process of an academic kind of level. It's more of a popular thing, which in a way is a burden on me, because I have to be very, very careful to be not only accurate, but cite sources. I'm a sort of fanatical about making sure anyone who reads the book knows where I got my information, and I credit people, credit other books, credit other sources for that.
Why is this fire relevant to us today?
Well, it's for a couple of reasons. One, the idea that it was predicted and people did not pay attention to it is a lesson that I think we have to keep repeating over and again, not just with things like the pandemic, but things like, well, particularly fires. I mean, when I talk about the Coconut Grove fire, I always cite the Station nightclub fire, the ghost ship fire in California. These are cases where these were dangerous situations. They knew it ahead of time, and yet we continue to have these tragedies. So the Boston Fire Department is still very keenly interested in this fire, because they've always, for years afterwards, they were worried it could happen again because of the problems with downtown Boston being too close to the buildings being too close together, and managed to fight it. What's happened is we've had a lot of advances, so you will not see the kind of conflagration. You won't see fire jumping from building to building like we did that, because there's internal water systems. They have more pressure to get up on buildings and this kind of thing. But there's always the concern that something will get out of control. So I think that has relevance. The other thing that is not specifically relevant, but I thought was interesting, was the epizootic, the horse equine, because it was very mysterious the way it spread. And at the time, they didn't have germ theory. They didn't know. There were all the speculation what was causing it. And to this day, we don't know what it was. We believe it was a flu. We believe it was some sort of virus, but the way it was spread, and there's people have done research on that. I didn't do this, but other people have done research on, they traced it to the railroads. So when horses were loaded up on the railroads, horses spread it horse to horse. And they didn't understand that. So they didn't isolate and keep it spread. It was allowed to spread. And as I said, it hit almost every horse in North America was affected, except maybe some in some rural areas. The good news, it wasn't fatal. And the other reason, and this is from the researchers that I contacted, why did it never happen again? It's because we quit using horses. So it could have happened again, but we quit using horses.
I have a question.
Yeah, Janelle, go ahead.
Yeah, I got a question. I'm struck by the fact that there were so few deaths in comparison to how massive this fire was. Are there any theories about that?
Yeah. Yeah, there are. One of the theories is this happened in the downtown area, and which had been a residential area just a little bit earlier. And it was now transitioned to be a commercial district. The fire happened on a Saturday. So a lot of the businesses were closed. It started at 7 o'clock at night. So a lot of people had closed up and had left for the day. The fire, even though it spread inexorably, but it did not spread quickly, if you know what I mean. In other words, people had time to flee. A lot of people lost everything they had, but they had time to get out because they could see the fire coming. It didn't spread. I was about to say it didn't spread like wildfire. That's a bad thing. But it didn't spread so fast you couldn't get out. There were some people trapped, but the major deaths were of the firefighters who were fighting the fire, and a lot of them were trapped by falling buildings, because they were trying to hold back the flame, and they were trapped in falling buildings that came down on them. So it was, and that's typical of a lot of fires. If it's less the fire than the structure collapse that causes that. The other thing, though, is there might have been more deaths, but we don't know. They did not track them. They did not keep track of them. I've gone through every source I can, and they had some names. I can't, from what I can find, I can't believe there were more than 20 to 30 people who died. Very much unlike the Chicago fire. Chicago fire killed several hundred people. And
even the Salem fire, the big Salem fire that happened, like 40, 50 years later, that was 60, 70 people? Yeah.
Right. And I don't know the exact titles, but yes, that did that. And the Coconut Grove fire killed nearly 500 people in one building. So in terms of loss of life, it does not compare to the Coconut Grove fire. But I think it was the nature that this was not a residential area anymore. It was a business area. So you did not have the concentrations of people living and getting caught into their homes at that point.
Could you talk a little bit about your process in doing your books? You've gotten so good at this. You've done so many of these. What's easier now? Like over, after 8 books, what have you learned? What sticks out as?
Well, research is an addiction. It's so great. Researching these books is the most fun you can have, I think, if you like this. I love going to libraries. I love just going in the internet and pushing and finding things and just keep drilling down and drilling down and drill. I just love it. And I find connections. You find amazing things going on. So like Sylvester Baxter was like, he was a reporter. Well, I found out there's a Sylvester Baxter Park that I've been to without even knowing it. And he had connections to Malden, so which I didn't know. So there's a process there of really researching. The process, though, is to cut off the research. You have to stop and start writing at some point, and that is hard to do. Writing is hard for these kind of books. It's not easy because you're constantly checking facts. And so I think the process I had was I had to cut off the research. Research is a lot of fun. You have to cut off and you have to start writing sooner or later. I can't just research it all and then start writing because I'll never get it done. So I tend to start some of the writing in the process of research. So that's kind of what I do. The other thing is knowing what to leave out as well as what to put in. I tell that to a lot of people, is that you collect so much stuff and you just cannot put everything in. You can't. You're not writing an encyclopedia. You have to pick those points that you think are the most important and are the most interesting. So you have to know where you're going to cut off doing. You just can't throw facts in. You have to weave it into a story. So it's a process of winnowing, and it's a process of then rewriting. I love Susan Orlean, the way she writes and what she does. I'm not even close to that, but I love the way she interjects fictional techniques in her writing with the descriptions of people and things. It's a beautiful thing. I don't do as much of that as I'd like to. And one of the things I'm leery of, and it's my journalistic training, I can't project too much. I don't like to project too much into people's heads. I do a little bit, but I just can't bring myself to create. I've seen, historical fiction, they really create the scenario and they really get into the people's heads, and I wish I could do more of that, but something stops me from doing it. That doesn't mean someone else couldn't. I think the thing is to do that. And one last thing I'll say is that I did a lot of walking in the downtown area for no other reasons than just to get the feeling of it. A lot has changed, a lot is different, but I actually spent some time just walking there and thinking about what might have happened and what happened at this spot. And that, I think, helps me a lot in terms of getting a sense of the history of it. I don't necessarily describe what I'm seeing because it's all different, but I do recommend, if you're writing, my rules for writing is, if you're writing a historical novel, especially about, or historical something on Boston, tell everyone you know, because there's always some connection, and to visit the place that you're writing about, just to even just sit there. Judah, did you have a question? Your hand's up.
Yeah, so sorry for being off screen, but I'm kind of getting over illness, so I'm
sure,
keeping the camera off. But yeah, I guess I was wondering about that whole thing with writing, like that line between fiction and nonfiction. I haven't read much of Susan Orlean, but thinking of like someone like Eric Larson.
Exactly.
And they definitely, I feel like, and when I've read a little bit of Orlean's writing, and I feel like they do get into characters' heads based on their research and kind of, say, well, they must have been thinking, or this is, where the, I mean, I think my memory of reading several of Eric Larson's books is I felt like he does that based on the research, not just like making things up wildly, but based on the sources that he finds, he seems to, do some of that. And then, so there's a certain amount of like supposition and getting in there. And also, again, like I'm thinking of like the Orchid Thief, that Orlean's, I think, also kind of writes sometimes about herself as a character. So she's part of the story. So, how do you deal with that? Do you put yourself in as the character at all, or you're just, or it's more just factual?
Well, that's an interesting question. In this book, I put myself in there when I interviewed some people, and I said, right, when I had a conversation with Paul Christian, who's a former fire commissioner, who's a friend, and so I put myself in there. So I am in this book more than in a lot of my other books, where I present myself. Here's what I found out. Here's what I looked at. But I don't do a lot of that. Certainly this is 150 years old, so I can't really, I'm really not there. I really wasn't there. So I really have to stay away. But Eric Larson's good thing. The other thing I think he does is he probably spends a lot more time than I do in terms of really being with the characters for long periods of time. And then, like, he wrote the Splendid and the Vile about Churchill, and he had a lot of source material in terms of his thoughts. So yeah, I think he was able to do that. In The White City, his stuff is very much based on facts. So I think he's not going out on a limb. Whereas if you read the opening of Steve Polio's The Dark Tide, Molasses Flood, which is quite a good book, but the very beginning, he's really inside the head of a person, and it's really well done. And it really gives a feeling. And I think he did enough research that he felt he could project himself into this person's head. And I like that. I like that. I probably should push myself to do more of that, but I'm just not maybe as skilled as of doing that. So, but I think, Judah, you're making a good point. You can't, writing history, you've got to get it to come alive. And you've got to bring out the people and the what it looked like, what it smelled like, what it tasted like. So I think that's something that a nonfiction writer should strive for. And whether or not I succeed at that, it's another thing. But it is something one should strive for.
Do you indicate somewhere in the book what drew you to the story? Because you as the writer are going back and like zoning in on this particular event that most people don't know about. What fascinated you? What drew you to it?
I didn't really do that in this book. But what I will say is I tried to write it to show my fascination through the actual writing of it.
Okay.
I mean, in the beginning, I start out with and this kind of, I start out with what downtown crossing is like today, and a description of it. It looks like this, and try to be, again, Susan Orlean, very creative. And then I say, what if you stood there in 1872 and looked out? What would you have seen? And then I do that. So I'm trying to show through the writing of it why that is so fascinating. But I don't actually go into why I did that. I don't know, maybe I should, but I didn't in that particular. Okay, maybe it's because I've written a lot of this is my third fire book, and I've written about this fire before. So I've written about it in my book Boston on Fire, and that chapter. So I think I write. You know what? Judah, I'm going to take it. I did say I wrote about this before, but there's more to tell. And so I did say that. It was more of an objective thing of here's why I would write this book after having already written about the fire in this one chapter.
Great.
So I
and
did
in order to read the book, to get the book, is there a way for us to get our?
It'll be out, but first of all, it's not even out. It's literally not out yet. It's they promised it was supposed to be published in January. Who knows, supply chains, I don't know.
Yeah.
But as soon as it's out, as soon as I get it out, I'm going to be doing more of it. This is more of a technical thing for you writers, Dog and Pony Show in terms of promoting it. I am trying to work with getting a quote unquote launch at a bookstore. I will see if that comes off. And so it will be available. It's on Amazon. It'll be in, I would recommend going to Porter Square bookstore or an internet bookstore and getting it there. I will be having events where it'll be less me talking, maybe more eating and drinking. hopefully.
Great, yeah. I just wanted to get it when it was hot
Right.
off the press. So to speak.
Right, yeah, I'll try to do.
Sorry, I couldn't resist that.
No problem. No problem. The other thing is, since you guys are all journalists, I'm actually kind of a glutton for punishment, because I'm working on another couple book projects right now, and I'm updating my Coconut Grove book to come out in November. See, the thing about this book is that the 150th anniversary of the fire is this coming November. So my strategy for promoting it is to come out now, but also to push for events in November of 2022, which is the anniversary. So, and as you know, Janelle, newspapers love anniversaries. So I'm working for that. So I'm pushing that. And that's also an 80th anniversary of the Coconut Grove fire. And so I'm going to be updating my Coconut Grove book. And then I'm working on a whole nother project. Don't ask. And you'd think I'd be making some money at that. I'm making nothing. So, but if all these things come out, and if maybe I'll have another book festival at my house. Judith, remember you did the reading there. We'll do another thing in the garden. So,
well, it sounds like you could basically just have the Schorow Festival with.
I have to admit, I'm egotistic. I said, I'm going to have my own book festival.
I mean, you've got it.
The hell with you. The hell with you bookstores. I'm going to have it. I'm going to make cocktails, and we're going to roast marshmallows. So you will all be invited. So I'm glad this was a small meeting, because this is going to be embarrassing with that. Judith, do you have another question?
No, I was just saying a thumbs up to the book festival.
Oh, the thumbs up. Okay, yeah.
I mean, I think you've earned that.
Well, hopefully.
Yeah. In terms of launching at a bookstore, I don't know if you have a contact at Porter Square Books.
I'm hitting them up. Yeah.
I have kind of a contact there. If you message me, or call me, we can talk about that. I mean, I can't guarantee anything, but
no. I've been in touch with them, but we'll see. But I'm not doing big launches. This is more. Well, I could go on about the whole marketing of the book, which is a whole nother thing. But for anyone who's interested in writing books, just be. That's the other thing I might say. When you begin your process of writing your book, think of the marketing right as you're writing it. Take lots of photos, take videos of stuff. Then you can use that in your website, in your talks. I think you have to be conscious of that as you're writing the book, and it's not particularly onerous either. You just think, oh, this will be interesting to talk about, when I do that. And there's all this talk about doing reels of books, that way. That's kind of little videos of that. So there's another way to look at it. But I think there's the thing about writing books today. It's you're your own marketer. You're your own thing. And Judy, that. Tracy, I don't know if we're destroying your image of the perfect literature, but it's good to see you, by the way. But Bev and I we went with she didn't mention, we did this mob book together, and we've done a lot of things like that. And and Janelle, I don't know if you're working on something, but just these are things that I've learned. I'm not an expert on it. I'm just saying I've learned them along the way, and they will help you to promote your book. And also it makes it more fun for you too. It makes it more, by the way, here's my cat's gonna. He can only wait so long before I can give him attention. So anyway.
I don't know if you mentioned this. Do they ever figure out what started the fire?
I didn't talk about. Yeah, they don't know exactly they know where it started, but they don't know how it started. But it was likely a spark that someone didn't bank a furnace in a building, and there was it started in the basement of a building on Summer Street, and it was a merchant building that was packed with merchandise, and it was a little bit of a factory, it's a little bit of a clothing factory there. And the thing about it, I don't dwell too much on how it started, because in the end, that it could have been started by anything. The thing is, it spread so quickly because of the delay in getting out the alarm, delay in the firefighters getting there, and then the fact it shot up to the roof, and then it started to spread roof to roof because of these mansard roof things. Again, they've been warning about them, but people wanted their fashion. It's interesting. And then the whole rebuilding of Boston was interesting. I mean, there's a lot of aspects to this fire that, especially about urban planning, because a lot of people looked at this fire and said Boston could have used this to do things like straighten the streets or create a better urban environment, and they didn't. They chose not to. And so we still have these narrow, crooked streets through the downtown. They straightened out some of them, but not enough. And it's again your perspective, because one source that I used quite a bit was a dissertation at BU published in 1972 that looked extensively at this fire. It was a really great dissertation, but that she was looking at it as from the viewpoint of Boston in the throes of decline in 1972. And basically said, we blew it, we should have done things. And now, of course, if you look at the downtown, it's booming. And so different history, you bring your own context to the story. She brought her context to her dissertation. I'm bringing the Globe did a whole big thing on the fire in 1972 at the 100th anniversary. And you can just see the Globe interpreting it as a political issue. Old-fashioned politics was that's literally the name of the Globe thing, was a story of the villain of old-fashioned politics. And it's like, frankly, I don't think those politics are old-fashioned. I think they're pretty much going on today. But it's interesting how you can look back at this fire and any historical event through a different lens, depending where you are right now. I mean, we're learning that right now with new interpretations of women's history and Black history and Native American history. We're looking back and saying, wait a minute, what did Sally Jennings have to say? Hemmings have to say about this? Or, just different ways of looking at things through different lights of today. That's just one of the ways when we write history, that's kind of what we do. And in a way, I mean, Judah, you write memoirs. So I think you probably write memoirs depending not only what you were back then, but where you are now looking back. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, that's actually something we were talking about in I'm teaching a class at Grub Street, and my last class on Monday, we talked about that. It's something that there's a writer, Sue Williams Silverman, who writes both memoir and fiction, and she calls it the voice of innocence and the voice of experience. So the voice of innocence is basically, what you, the character, kind of knew at that time that she was going through, whatever she was going through, more kind of the superficial and immediate reactions and what was going on and how you understood it at the time. And then the voice of experience is the older writer who is telling the story and has some perspective on why are we in this scene, or why are we, what's the theme, what's the story, why did it matter? So a story rather than just a situation. So yeah, that is something. I think memoir really needs both of those perspectives. Some of that what I knew then, and some of what I know now that I didn't understand then. And you somehow have to blend them.
Right.
And so yeah, definitely.
it extends to photography. I know, Janelle, you're doing a lot of photography, but the way this fire, there was a lot of focus on the physical destruction of not the human, but the physicality of the buildings, the destruction, and the way those pictures were taken reflected that. And it was viewed as a spectacle. There are very few close-ups of people in the fire. It's more standing back. Both the illustrations and the one of the firefighters, that was the one, very few where you're really up and you can see the details of people's face, because that was an illustration, not a photograph. But there are a lot of things that you would think that the photographers would have put, like more pictures of people with their businesses, and it was more like the spectacle of it. So there's a sensibility that comes through even in photographs, like there is with writing of history, in the way things are taken. So anyway, well, we're at an hour. So you guys are very, very nice to hang with me for this long. Any final questions or feedback for me? And if not, I think it's time for a drink.
I just want to say I really liked your slideshow. That
Okay.
really brought a lot of stuff to life, and especially the angle of the horses. That's really interesting stuff. You know, what other fire has that kind of angle? You know, and those things that you've dug up about the fire where the horses couldn't be there.
Yeah.
You know, right. Man had to do it all by himself.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's good stuff.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I thank you. I really, this is mentioned in connection with this fire a lot, but no one's ever, I really went into this, the whole horse pandemic, and it just opened up some really interesting avenues. So thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Stephanie, Adam has a question for you.
Sure.
And I didn't plant this question.
Okay.
And it may be for a totally other time here on our SPJ Zoom. But he wants to know, what was it like researching and writing the Boston Mob Guide? And I swear, I didn't plant this question.
Well, thanks, Judah. Well, I had to rely on my friend Bev Ford, who knew these guys. So really, it was her. It's all her fault.
Don't blame it on me.
Yeah, but no, I think that was a case where we were, what it was like. It was fun. It was fun. I mean, well, it was a pain in the ass. So, get it done. But and we joke that we wrote it in 2 weeks. We did a lot of preliminary research, but in a 2-week period, we were up like 24/7,
Talking on the phone at 4
talking on the phone and getting it done. But I think what amazed me again, and then Bev, you can, is just how much connection there were among the mobsters and among other people in Boston history, and again, location. I walked up Winter. I'm on Winter all the time. I have a pottery. I go to a pottery studio there, so I'm always to this day I walk by and I look down the thing and walking around. I mean, that sense of place, I think, is. Oh, and of course we had photos with it too. So that would be my answer. So it was just astonishing about how the mob was woven into Boston history. I mean, what would you say, Bev?
Well, what struck me more was the writing about some of these people and then covering the Whitey Bulger trial and actually seeing them up there testifying, just stunning, some of the things that came out of their mouth.
Mm-hmm.
So, but the things I remember about researching and writing it is more like the 4 o'clock in the morning phone calls rather than doing anything else.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So, well, Stephanie, that was a great presentation.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm sure everybody found it interesting. And
Great. Well, thank you. Well, thank you for coming. Now you know the story, but if I do have a big party, I'll let everyone know. So
Sounds good.
okay. All right, gang.
nice, Janelle.